Okay, Rabbi Sai, we're on the DAF of Kuf Hey Amud Aleph in Eruvin, the final Amud of Maseches Eruvin. And just to bring us up to date, we had suggested yesterday that the machlokis of Rabbi Shimon Bar Nanas and Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah is really based upon the fundamental issue of whether or not there is an Isser Kares when you bring a sheretz into the Beis HaMikdash. We know that a person who has Tumah sheretz, who goes into the Beis HaMikdash, is violating an Isser Kares. But what about the sheretz itself? So we had suggested that Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas, who says that when you find a sheretz on Shabbos, you're only allowed to remove the sheretz proactively if it's in the holiest of the parts of the Beis HaMikdash, but if it's in the less holy parts in the courtyard, you're not allowed to remove the sheretz. This indicates that he holds that there's no real Isser Kares for bringing in a sheretz, because if there was an Isser Kares, then anywhere that you'd find it in the Beis HaMikdash, you'd have to remove it. That was the assumption that the Gemara is making, and therefore Rabbi Akiva, who says that no matter where you find it in the Beis HaMikdash, you got to remove it even on Shabbos, holds that there is an Isser Kares associated with bringing in a sheretz into the Beis HaMikdash. Okay? Now, Amar Rabbi Yochanan responds to this in some way. There's a machlokas between Rashi and Tosfos as to how Rabbi Yochanan is responding to this suggestion. Rashi says that Rabbi Yochanan is rejecting the suggestion, and that Rabbi Yochanan is going to argue that there's a difference between bringing in a sheretz to the Beis HaMikdash versus how to react when the sheretz is already there. I don't know how Rashi sees that. It could be just from the language, from the syntax that the Gemara uses, that normally when you find lema b'hakamiflagi or lav b'hakamiflagi, is this not the machlokas? And then you have a respondent. Usually the respondent is coming to reject that suggestion. And that's why Rashi says that, no, Rabbi Yochanan is coming to tell you, no, even though Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas are arguing, but their argument is how to react when it's already there. But it could be that everyone agrees that there's still an Isser Kares to bring it in the first place. Okay? Now Tosfos disagrees. Tosfos says that no, the two go hand in hand. Based on the psukim that we learned yesterday, if there's an Isser Kares to bring something in, then there's automatically going to be a requirement to remove it as quickly as possible. And it would stand to reason that if you hold that there's an Isser Kares, you would have to suspend all Isurim Derabanan, such as handling muktzah and becoming tamei, even if it comes to making your belt or your sash tamei, you'd have to do whatever you need to do in order to remove the tumah. So, therefore, Tosfos says that Rabbi Yochanan is not coming to reject the suggestion, but he's coming to confirm it, and to suggest now that there's scriptural basis for both Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva. So let's see. We'll learn like Tosfos for now. Amar Rabbi Yochanan u'shnei mikra echad darshu. That Rabbi Yochanan supports this, and he says that both Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva can live with the following pasuk as a support for their respective positions. The pasuk is talking about what Chizkiyahu HaMelech did to remove any pagan idolatry from the Beis HaMikdash and really clean the place up during his lifetime. And it says, Vayavohu HaKohanim Lifinima Beis Hashem Litaher, that the Kohanim come into the inner part of the temple in order to purify it. Vayotziu es kol hatuma asher matzu beheichal Hashem, and they removed all of the tumah that they found in the heichal, which is the covered portion. Lachatzar Beis Hashem, they bring it into the courtyard. Vayikablu halaviyim lahotzi lanachal kidron chutza, and then from the courtyard, the Levim came and they took all of the tumah and they brought it outside the temple, put it in Nachal Kidron to completely dispose of it. Now the question, of course, is, the point that's curious about this pasuk is that the Kohanim went into the Heichal, they brought it out, and the Levim took over the work. The question is, why did the Levim have to take over? Why couldn't the Kohanim do it all themselves? So this is the machlokes. So Mar Savar Midi'ishtini Ba'azara Balavim Tuma Ba'azara Leka. So this would be according to Reb Shimon ben Nanas. His position would be, look, you see that since there's an Isser for a Kohen to expose himself to Tumah, we only permitted the Kohanim to do the first part, since they're the only ones that are allowed to go into the Heichal. But once you get into the Azara, and there's no longer that higher level of Kedusha, we no longer allow the Kohanim to make themselves Tameh, and we consign it therefore to the Levim. It therefore stands to reason that just like you can't allow the Kohanim to make themselves tamei any further, it also you would not even allow them to violate a shvus derabanan, a rabbinic prohibition on Shabbos, to allow them to remove the sheretz. And that's where Reb Shimon ben Nanas would derive his issue from. What was your question?
They already tell me so.
Well, you could be talking about a production line of Kohanim. And furthermore, you have to also remember, I'm tamei, right? I've become tamei probably several times in my lifetime. May I now go into a cemetery?
No, of course not.
Okay, so this is a very important discussion, but it could be part of this issue as well.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Umar savar ad heicha delo efshir balaviyim mafkid kohanim hashad efshir balaviyim solam etami kohanim. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, I have a different interpretation of this pasuk. So Rabbi Akiva can live with this pasuk as well. He'll tell you that no, really, when you have a sheretz anywhere in the Beis Hamikdash, you have to remove it. There's an Isser Kares everywhere. But the reason why the Levim took over the job is because if you can't unnecessarily expose Kohanim to Tumah. Why did the Kohanim start the job? The Kohanim started because they're the only ones that are allowed to go into the Heichal. A Levi is not allowed to go into the Heichal. So therefore, the Kohanim had no choice. They had to make themselves tamei because they're the only ones that are allowed to go in. But once they don't have to expose themselves to any further Tumah, let the Leviim take over. Not because there's no requirement to remove Tumah from the Beis HaMikdash, but rather because you can do it without violating any Isser. Okay, fine. Tanu Rabbanan.
I hope the Levim are appreciated for all this.
I'm sure that they are. Shlomi, we love you.
Okay.
We absolutely love you.
The Kohanim get this credit.
Just remember, you're very special to us. Tanu Rabbanan. Hakol nichnasin beheichal livnos l'sakin olahotzi esatuma umitzvah bekohanim. Now the Brisa says that any Jew is kosher when it comes to doing non-sacrificial or non-worship work in the Beis HaMikdash. You need a contractor, you need a paint job, you need someone to repair the stones, whatever it is. Anyone is kosher to go in. Any Jew is kosher to go in and fix it. It sounds like any Jew. It could be even a non-Jew, but we'll see the qualifications. And anyone is kosher to take out tumah if it needs to be removed. From the previous pasuk, we saw an indication that if you have a preference, you have to use the kohanim, even though you're exposing them to tumah. But let's see what the Brisa says. But the mitzvah is with the kohanim. The kohen should always come first, because after all, he's the only one that's allowed to go into the heichal under normal circumstances. Im ein sham kohanim nichnasin levim. But if no kohanim are available, so have a Levi go in instead. Im ein sham levim nichnasim Yisraelim. And if there's no Levi available, then Yisrael should go in instead. V'idi tahorin in tamei and lo. But what you see is that everyone has to be tahor. In other words, no one who's tamei is allowed to go in, which would mean that if you have a choice between a tahor Yisrael and a tamei kohen, you'd have to use the tahor Yisrael. Only someone who's tahor is allowed to go in, which would probably, by definition, also preclude Einam Yehudim as well. So we're just dealing with Jews at this point. So Amar Rav Huna Rav Kahana Misayeya Kohani. So Rav Huna says, but Rav Kahana, whose name also implies that he was a Kohen, he was a big supporter of the Kohanim, meaning that he was like a member of the Kohanim's union, and as a result, he had a different version of the Brisa, or a different Brisa, which says you always give priority to the Kohanim. The Tani Rav Kahana, mitoch shenamar achel haparoches lo yavo. He says, look, there's a pasuk in the Torah that precludes a kohen who's a balmum, who's got some kind of physical defect, from doing the avoda. And the way that the Torah says it is ach. However, he may not approach the paroches to do the avoda, the curtain to do the avoda. The word ach is coming to be memait, that even though a balmum is pasul for avoda, however, you might think that also precludes a balmum who's a kohen from going in that area between the altar and the antechamber of the eichel in order to, let's say, do some repairs. Let's say he's an artisan and he knows how to put new copper plating on the mizbeach, because the mizbeach in the Mishkan is copper plated. So maybe he's an expert in doing that. So you might think that since he's a balmum, and the Torah says he may not approach, that he's not allowed to do it for repairs. Tamul Omar ach cholak. Therefore the Torah says ach, which is to tell you that no, even though he's excluded from avoda, but he's not excluded from this kind of work. And mitzvah batamimim, and there the Brisa continues and it says, it's a mitzvah to use a kohen who is not a balmum. However, ein sham tamimim nichnasim balei mumen. But if no kohen who's unblemished is available, then you can take a blemished kohen. Mitzvah batahorin, and furthermore, it's a mitzvah to use a kohen who's tohar. But ein sham toharim nichnasim tameim. If no kohen tohar is available to do this job, then you're allowed to use a kohen who's tamei. But what you see is from this brisa is idi v'idi kohanim in Yisraelim lo. But you see from Rav Kahana's brisa that you always have to use a kohen. Even a kohen who's tamei would take priority over Yisrael who's tohar. From Rav Kahana's brisa, you always give priority to the kohanim to do any kind of work, even repair work, in the Beis Hamikdash. Now, iboyeluhu. So now, based on Rav Kahana's brisa, the question is raised. Now, what if you have two kohanim? They both have some kind of defect, and tamei ubalmum ezameh nichnas. One is a tamei. One of them is impure, but he's got a perfect body. The other one is tohar, but he's got some kind of physical defect. So which one of them, if those are the only two kohanim available to do the repair, which one takes priority? You don't see any indication from the brisa. So Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav Tamei Nichnas. So in the name of Rav, they say that it's better for a kohen who's tamei, who's unblemished, to do the work, because the ha'ishteri ba'avodas tzibur. Because after all, we do find that many times a kohen who's tamei is allowed to do the avoda in a case where the entire congregation is tamei. When the entire congregation is tamei, we suspend the rules of tumah, and we allow even a tamei kohen to go ahead and do the avoda. So since we have precedent for that, it's better to have, and we don't have any precedent for a kohen balmum to do the avoda, so therefore it's better to have the tamei kohen to do the avoda than the balmum kohen. And Rabbi Elazar Omer balmum nichnas da ha'ishteri b'achilas kachim. And Rabbi Elazar says just the opposite. He says better to have a balmum who's tohar to go do the repairs, because after all, we see that just because a person has a physical disability does not preclude him from eating kudshim, from eating sacrificial meat. Whereas if you're tamei, you're completely precluded from partaking of anything sacrificial. So that gives an advantage to the balmum who's tohar over the regular kohen who is tamei. Now, we're going to save this last paragraph for the siyum. So Ad Kan, and the siyum is Wednesday evening at 6:30 p.m. And you're right, Benny, you'll be coming?
I hope.
We need you there. We need you there. Okay. It could be we'll do mincha 6:15. I think so. Okay. All right. So 6:15 mincha, 6:30 dinner. Please join us. Let's just do the Mishnah of Maseches Psachim, and the rest we'll leave over for Rabbi Torchiner for Shabbos' DAF. We're just going to do the Mishnah now. Isn't this a beautiful first word of a Maseches? Or, which is light, right? And you know that it says in the Torah that when the Bnei Yisrael were facing one of the last plagues, the Makas Choshech, it says L'chol Bnei Yisrael haya or b'moshavosam, that the Jewish people had light in all of their dwellings. This was a precursor for the spiritual light that they were about to experience. So therefore should not be surprising that when we talk about the Maseches that is about our liberation, about our exodus, we started with the word or. Okay? Even though the word or doesn't really fit so well, because as you'll see, what is the topic of the first Mishnah? It's about doing bedikas chametz at night. And euphemistically, we refer to night as or la'arba asar. That the light of the 14th, right, which really is a reference to when the light goes out on the night of the 14th, that's when you're supposed to do bedikas chametz, bodkinas chametz, and you use or haner. Once again, the word or is used. You use the light of the candle.
It's interesting they don't say Mishnah.
Well, that's usually the case when you start a Maseches. The first word is the. Yeah.
So grammatically, should have said Leor also? Like does or fit in at all? Rashi says Leor, but or light. It doesn't seem to flow.
I'm not sure. Kol makom shein machnisin bo chametz ein sarach bedika. Now, any place where you know that over the course of the year chametz has never traveled, you don't have to check that area. If you have a room that you never bring chametz into, then you don't have to do b'dikas chametz in that room. Uvama amru beishuros b'martev, right? And why then did the rabbi say that when you have a cellar, you have to check the first 2 rows of the cellar? We're talking about a wine cellar. If that's not a place where you normally bring chametz, why then should you have to check any part of the wine cellar? So the Gemara says, Makom shemachnisin bo chametz, is because the rabbis were talking about a wine cellar where chametz is brought down. Because many times you'll have a butler, and you'll send the butler in the middle of the meal to go fetch some more wine for the meal, and he'll be sitting in the kitchen eating his sandwich, and you say, hey, butler, go fetch us more wine, and he's taking a bite out of his sandwich, and he grumbles and gets up and carries his sandwich with him. Goes down to the wine cellar when there's a chametz situation. So that's why the rabbi said that you have to check the first 2 rows. So Beis Shammai Omrim, now the question is, what do we mean by the first 2 rows? So Beis Shammai Omrim Beis Shuros Al Pnei Kol HaMartev. They say, and the Gemara will actually clarify this language, which is a little bit ambiguous, but it sounds like you have a stack, which is a stack of barrels, meaning that, let's say you have 10 across and 5 high of barrels of wine. So you have multiple stacks of, let's say, 10 across and 5 high. So Beis Shammai say you have to check the first 2 rows or stacks of 10 by 5. And Beis Hillel omrim shtei shuros hachitzonos shehein ha'elyonos. And Beis Hillel say you only have to check the first 2 of the outer row, which are the top 2 rows. Meaning that, according to Beis Hillel, just look at what's the barrels that are facing you and check the top 2 rows of the barrels that are facing you on the exterior. You don't have to check anything else. We'll get more clarity, Mirz Hashem, tomorrow when you come to the DAF.